Well, hello and welcome to this special. I'm Minnie Menon, and as we mark World Heritage Day, today we put the spotlight on climate conservation and communities. What makes this discussion really interesting from my vantage point are two things. First, it brings together experts, conservation architects who've done some phenomenal work on the ground, and students from across 20 institutes, most of them working on conservation and studying conservation and architecture. So it's wonderful to be here. We also are putting the spotlight on something which I feel resonates with every single person and also helps us link heritage with the present. What is the importance of heritage? It is really the fact that the rearview mirror allows us to take stock of where we are and also provides us with answers. So today we're talking about heritage water management systems across India. And as a history lover who's traveled through the length and breadth of the country, I've always been amazed at the sheer abundance of tanks, waterways, wells, the most gorgeous pieces of architecture, and yet we don't give them enough importance. So today we will try to make amends to that and bring all our experts together to weigh in on this. So let me introduce you to our experts. Of course, we have Malini Tadani, who's Executive Director at the World Monument Fund India. We have Annabel Lopez, who is a conservation architect and who's leading the way on the conservation of water management systems. We have Mohan Rao, who's a landscape architect, doing some phenomenal work on some of the WAVs. Jigna Desai, who's an academician and an architect. And we have Anu Mridul, conservation architect, also working very closely with stepwells in Rajasthan. Before we start the discussion, Malini would like to bring you in on the conversation, start with you. It's wonderful to partner with World Monument Fund on a discussion like this. Tell us about the work you're doing and how you zeroed in on water management as an important theme for World Monument Fund.
Thank you very much, Minnie, and thank you for anchoring this really important subject. And water, as we all know, is something that we'll all have to worry about for the rest of our lives. So it's actually fantastic that the World Monuments Fund has focused on water as a theme. Just to step back a bit, World Monuments Fund was established 60 years ago. In India, we worked in India for many years, of many of those 60 years, but set up as a not-for-profit in India 10 years ago, and have been working on a whole diverse range of projects from adaptive reuse, restoration of historic monuments and bodies across the length and breadth of the countries. And we have a very interesting program called the Watch, which is really every 2 years, there is a watch that is invited. In fact, people from around the world are invited to place on watch and nominate places that they think are important to be noticed, to be conserved, to be saved, or just to be talked about. And in 2020, on the World Watch, the Deccan water systems were placed on, on watch. And that led for us, WMF to go into a study of the heritage and the historic water systems of the Deccan. And from there emerged a very interesting report from which, in fact, we've created a program called the Historic Water Bodies of India. And that is the program under which we are now, in fact, restoring water bodies of different kinds across the country. So we have projects in Delhi, in Rajasthan, in Gujarat, in Maharashtra, and in Karnataka as well. And I'm not going to steal the thunder from any one of the panelists because they're the ones who are working on many of these projects. But I'd like Annabel, in fact, to tell us about the Deccan study, which led us to this theme of water. I'm really delighted that, this spotlight that we have placed on water and heritage and communities, because communities get affected by the lack of water, but equally it is the communities that through collective ownership of the water that is in their neighborhoods or can be revitalized in their neighborhoods can actually secure their own sources of water for themselves, for their communities, for their children. And so it's critical have this conversation around climate and conservation and communities, because all the three have to work together. Without one or the other, anything that we do would fail. So I think, that's a very exciting step that World Monuments Fund worldwide and in India has taken. And I'm delighted to be working on this really exciting theme. And I'd invite others to speak about the work that has been done in this space. Thank you.
Fantastic, Malini. We will go to Annabelle to talk about the watch and the mapping of the water bodies in the Deccan. But before that, Mohan, if I can come to you to give a context of this. I've been to Dholavira and many of the Harappan sites. You have beautiful stormwater tanks over there. The thought that had gone into water conservation is quite remarkable. I wonder where we forgot it as a civilization. If you see our cities today, but I'm going to ask you. Give us an overview on this elaborate water management system that we've historically had, because many of our valves are actually from the 7th, 8th century, so they really go back a long way.
Yes, it's important to understand, other than, of course, the excitement of rediscovering the past and reviving something. It's almost magical in many cases. But more importantly, I think it's a wonderful opportunity for us to actually understand and ingest the wisdom of the past in a way that can actually have practical everyday applications to address current day challenges. So this is not merely an exercise in conservation for its own sake, as one would see in a piece of art, which is valuable by itself. But given the challenges that we have in the development paradigms, in the climate change, and the immense vulnerabilities of communities, typically most of these challenges can be met when we deploy these traditional knowledge systems. They can be called in various ways, but it is not merely limited to the structures alone, but understanding the hydrology of a place in its ecological and environmental dimensions. And that the fact that these are pre-industrial solutions makes it all the more valuable, because it means that they are passive, they're not fuel-based, they're not energy-based systems, and they have all the more relevance when the world is now looking to find more nature-based solutions for all our development needs.
And let's talk about the WATCH program of 2020 and the work that you've done in the mapping of historical water systems in the Deccan. This is an arid belt. It's also a belt where groundwater is. I think. I don't know. I'm not the expert, but groundwater is difficult to get by. Take us through the work you've done there and the learnings from it.
Thanks, Minnie. And as we've just heard from Malini and Mohan, there is no doubt that India's historic water systems are really marvels of both engineering and sustainable management systems. They, in fact, reflect not just the indigenous knowledge, but also how these systems adapted to climate and, most importantly, how the community managed these historic systems and the precious water resource that they have. These systems, however, today are under threat due to neglect, urbanization, and of course, environmental changes that are taking place every day. As Malini mentioned, WMF's engagement with historic water systems began way back in 2020 when the historic water systems of the Deccan Plateau was nominated to the WATCH program and it was listed. This listing ensured that the site got attention, as it was one of the 25 sites in the world that really had immense historical significance, but also had the potential to impact the community around. And after this site was put on the WATCH program, WMF realized the importance of taking up this initiative of conserving historic water bodies and, more importantly, bringing them back into the lives of the community so that this resource can be used once again. It may not always be possible for the water to be used as it was historically used, but the idea is to make water available today when it is such a scarce resource. And the first step that the WMF took was compiling all the information that was available in the public domain on historic water systems. So we compiled or collated a database of information that was available and tried to identify the different typologies of water systems And as part of this exercise, what you can see on the screen was the different types of water systems that we identified. So the first one is storage and access structures, which is step wells, your tanks, etc. The various irrigation networks, recreational structures like gardens and water palaces, etc. Interface structures or the ghats and riverfronts. And finally, the distribution networks. The most popular one is the Kannad system in Karnataka. And this database also had information. It had a very extensive bibliography. It had a list of resource people, organizations working in the field, and also success stories or projects that have been implemented and have made an impact. After this, the next step was to then look at a pilot project that would demonstrate the potential of conserving a historic water body. And essentially, we were looking at projects where we could work in three verticals. One is conservation of the built fabric, of course, then rejuvenation of this historic water system. And third and most important, I would say, is how a project like this could benefit the local community. Over the years, WMF, over the last 3 years, WMF has identified and started work on 5 different projects in different parts of the country. One is Rajaon Ki Pauli, which is in the heart of an archaeological park in Delhi. The archaeological park itself has buildings from the 12th century onwards, but this particular Baudi is from the 16th century. Then we have Taj Baudi in Karnataka from the Adil Shahi dynasty. And a very interesting site because in addition to being a water resource, it is also the site, a venue for different traditional and religious practices, which I will talk about a little more in a bit. And we are also conserving 4 Baudis in Jaipur, a kund in Kapadwanj in Gujarat, and a riverfront in Maharashtra. So this is the various types of projects that WMF has embarked on. I would just like to briefly touch upon 2 of these. One is Taj Baudi, like I just mentioned, in Karnataka, which was built by the Adil Shah dynasty. It was built to commemorate Taj Sultana, which was Ibrahim II's first wife. And the period it was built was probably between 1579 and 1626. It is in the midst of a very dense settlement. To the north of the site is a road, and all around it are houses closely packed. A few quick views of the tank itself. It has a main entrance, which is to the north, flanked by 2 minarets. There were sarais originally on either side of it, which today are, of course, abandoned, but the sarai on the west is used as a mosque. On the south and the eastern side, the settlement has hemmed in right against the walls of the tank. What one hopes to achieve in this project is demonstration of the conservation of a heritage resource, which can provide opportunities for both tourism as well as generating livelihoods for the people, the community around. We hope this to be a model project which demonstrates the revival of traditional water systems. And once the water is rejuvenated, it will also augment the water supply for the community around. And most importantly, the environmental impact will hopefully improve the microclimate of the region. I'm sure Mohan will touch on the various measures that we are taking in this project, so I won't go into that, but this is an image showing the larger context. There are lots of open spaces around, and we hope that this water would also be used for irrigation, etc. The condition of the Baudi today, and what I was just mentioning about the various traditional religious practices that are still prevalent in this at the site. What you see on the left is an open space, and every year during Ganesh Chaturthi, a tank is dug here so that the idols can be immersed. So this is a practice which originally happened in the main tank itself, but due to environmental concerns, this practice has now been shifted to this vacant plot in the site itself. And every time a new temple is built and a deity has to be instated in the temple, the deity is brought here and the water and a puja is carried out with the water from the Baudi. And this is something that I've seen happen time and again every time I visited the site. So there are many of these practices that are continuing today. Unfortunately, the condition all around the building is rather sad, but the conservation work that we're undertaking will look at restoration of these spaces and adaptive reuse. One of the challenges is, of course, the community that is living right on the edge of this Baudi. And the other aspect that we've had to deal with in a site like this are the multiple stakeholders. So this is just to give you an idea of the kind of challenges that one is dealing with projects like this. Of course, the conservation process has taken its normal course of documentation, condition assessment, and based on the findings, a work plan was drawn up and phasing of the work established based on the funding that was available from the donor. After an MOU was signed with the government, the conservation work has actually started on ground. So that was just a brief overview of how the WMF takes up the actual execution of these projects. And the other site I'd like to quickly show you is Rajaon Ki Baudi, which is in Delhi in Mehrauli Archaeological Park, which is the site of one of the oldest settlements in Delhi. It has the Qutub Minar right next to it. So historically a very important area. When WMF intervened at this site, it was completely inundated with water. There was water right up to what is actually a 4-story Baudi. The water was right up to the topmost level. Now, this is not water from the springs, but it was because a drain was running very close to the site, and the drain was not connected to this drainage system, and the water had completely overflown in this area, and the area around was completely submerged with water. One of the interventions that WMF did in this site was to address this drain. So before the project, the work on the actual building started, one got the Delhi Jal Board to connect this drain so that the water is not spilling over in this area. And of course, then the usual process of dewatering the Baudi. You can see the depth of the Baudi here. All 4 stories were exposed as part of the dewatering process. All the silt was manually removed from the site. The walls, which were covered with algae, were cleaned with high pressure water. And of course, the built fabric all around was restored. You can see from left to the right of my screen the images of the building as we found it, removal of the plaster which was delaminated, and then plastering it again with traditional materials like lime. It's an amazing structure, and these stucco moldings, etc., were cleaned as part of the process. Missing moldings were replaced wherever evidence was available, and you can see the Baudi from the way we found it to finally what it looks like once restored. Measures to keep the water clean continue. This is the surface scum being removed with a bamboo stretched across the surface of the water. Fish have been added to ensure that the water remains clean. And we hope that once the site is restored, it will draw people who would come here. It would be the greatest pleasure would be to see the community using the water and the site in this manner.
Right. Right. Thanks for that, Annabelle. A detailed look at 2 of the water bodies, 2 Baudis, one in Bijapur, one in New Delhi. Let me get Mohan in on this before I go to Jigna. Mohan, you worked on both these projects. I also want to put the spotlight on the communities around this. You know, at least in both these cases, it was in areas which have been populated for a long time. There is an interaction with the water body that communities have had. Any kind of intervention requires a buy-in from them. What were the lessons and learnings from that?
Yes, so that's a very interesting question because it actually spans many different dimensions. So of course, the matter of resource management itself, water as a daily resource for the community, but also the social and cultural fabric that what that space means, whether it holds the water or otherwise. Annabelle touched upon the religious and spiritual aspects in some cases. Some cases it's a little bit more mundane. It could be somebody using it as a washing cart to using it for irrigation or gardening needs. But what's interesting with these water structures in all their dimensions is that they are not unitary in dimension. Unlike how we can see of architectural spaces as having a space for a function, these tend to be spanning across many different aspects. And when we start looking at the idea of human settlements and its relationship to water, the very different dimensions that come across. The most obvious ones that seem to us is could be a wow or a baudi because they are constructed and they remain that way for a long time. But there are also what is most important to understand are expressions that are looking at two very key ideas across all historic settlements. One is the idea of decentralization, and the other is of resilience. So they are not always ceremonial or royal bodies that are dedicated to a particular hierarchy of society, but they're spread across the human settlements. This is a graphic example of Puri, which has recorded history from the 6th century onwards. And we can see the imprint of water is not merely limited only to the ceremonial part, but right across the structure. And what is also very important whenever we're dealing with water is the way in which the idea of water actually shapes the occupation of land. Unlike our current day modernist imagination of the built footprint coming first and then the infrastructure following it, it is the land and its resources that actually formed and shaped the occupation of land. And this can be seen across most historic settlements. This is a case that is very well known from the World Heritage Site at Hampi, where even though the city sits on a river, there's not a single evidence of the humans drawing water directly from the river for their everyday needs. So the river was more a spiritual background rather than a water infrastructure as one imagines. And the entire city actually not just survived, but thrived to be a center of trade and commerce and as well as agricultural productivity in a region that actually gets no more than 600 millimeters of water, where the entire landscape becomes a canvas for managing water. And of course, expressed in different ways. The most famous expressions are the pushkarnis that one sees in Hampi. And this is the before and after image of its restoration. Now, in these systems, as in the case of whether it's Taj Baudi or Rajan Ki Bauli that Annabelle touched upon, these are not the engineering interventions that are required, but it is reviving the connection between the built and the natural system that actually brings the water back into the system. These expressions are varied across many different spaces. They define not just water and its need as a physical infrastructure, but they also actually define moments in space, responding to specific social or ecological dimensions. This is a Sarai in central Karnataka, which continues to not just thrive as a social space, but it's also a very important source of water for the larger region. This is just south of Chitradurga in a place called Santebennur, a very important point on the caravan route that connected the Vijayanagara Empire to the west coast. Now, what's also interesting is if we move beyond the purely historical, what captures our imagination as historic conserved structures, is the abundance of these systems in all our urban areas. It could be Bangalore, it could be Delhi, Indore, Mumbai, Pune, you name the city, because most of these cities, with the exception of maybe 2 or 3 cities in the country, are all grown over older footprints of settlements, which means what we now think of as commons are very much part of the larger blue and green infrastructure that defined the original settlements. The expressions of these commons can vary in different places. In let's say in peninsular India, they may be defined by a tank or a temple, whereas in central India, in Jharkhand, it may be defined by a sarnasthal or other ways of expressions of these commons. But these are intrinsically linked to the idea of water systems and resilience in a very close manner. And moving even further away from what we consider traditionally as listed heritage, but very much heritage from the embedded wisdom perspective, is the myriad ways in which we have actually tapped and harnessed groundwater across peninsular India, because this is a region that is purely dependent on rain, and tapping and harnessing and leveraging groundwater was the only way for humans to be, as someone famously said, to throw away the shackles and the tyranny of rivers as defining the power centers. This really allowed power to flow to its farthest corners in the most decentralized way, where anybody and everybody could actually harness this resource for productive use. And this continues to be the case even in present day, if you're looking at urban poor settlements. This is, for example, an exercise that we did across several tribal settlements in Jharkhand, which are part of the urban poor settlements. But the idea was, rather than think of provisioning the urban poor with merely a water supply or a sanitation connection, the idea was to revive their own traditional systems. And the revival was actually worked upon and activated by the people themselves. So there could be no greater example of a community involvement where they take ownership of not merely just the maintenance as we see it, but the entire process from conception up to execution to maintenance. So what would otherwise be disused wells, which would be filled with garbage, are now social spaces for celebration, because they actually become very valuable resources for the community. And continuing the same idea of leveraging the ideas of groundwater, but essentially drawing, and I go back to what I started with, which is to draw from the wisdom of the past. And how do we leverage it to meet current day demands in extremely arid climates? This is from a place called Chamarajanagar, which receives the same rainfall as Rajasthan does, because it's in the rain shadow region in southern Karnataka. But to be able to activate and enable entire agricultural systems based purely on traditional management systems, not a gram of cement used, not one electrical motor system, not one mechanical system, but purely leveraging what we know of the past and how do we then apply it to meet current day demands. Frequently, many of the water systems are not as tangible as we would like them to be, even the historical ones, because many of them are embedded systems and not necessarily constructed systems. So these are some examples from a series of forts, the most famous of which is Chitradurga in Karnataka, which used to be the erstwhile capital from where Hyder Ali and Tipu Sultan started their campaigns. The entire fortification spanning almost 30 square kilometers. It was not just the fortification of the kings, but the entire population lived in the fortified town and were completely water secure even under a long siege. And the longest siege recorded for this fort was over a year. And there was no panic, no distress. And now I come to the last two parts of it. And when we are talking about the idea of using ancient wisdom and to meet the present day demands, the images that we see on the right are extremely old and time-tested ways of managing water in the deltaic regions of Orissa and West Bengal. They're called pukurs and pokris in different ways, because here you're actually freeing the land from water to be able to occupy the land, because it is constantly inundated. Whereas in the west and the south, we were talking about the paucity of water. Here it is the overabundance of it. And yet you need to figure out how do you manage to live with such a system, not think of it as flooding or a problem, but think of it as a potential that can be used to shape the land in itself. What the images that we see on the right and what we see on the left is merely learning from the past so that you can actually influence present day occupation of that land. Taj Bowdy, Annabelle has gone through each of the details and very in exhaustive detail. Oh, the only things I would like to touch upon here is that it is not only the conservation of the well or cleaning the water or reviving the systems, including the underground springs. I will not talk about the social religious aspects, which she has already really well explained. But what becomes important is to understand the position of each of this in the larger hydrological cycle. They are not ever, in any case, independent systems that can be dealt with on their own. They frequently are always part of larger systems, frequently hundreds of square kilometers spans and links these systems. This, in fact, is an image and an interpretation from Adil Shahi time 1630, if I'm not mistaken, which is a beautiful work of a tapestry that actually captures the urban fabric of that time's Bijapur and all the inherent water systems. Of course, the way the maps are imagined and interpreted are very different from how we would do it today. But looking beyond the wonderful art piece that it is, it gives us great clues in how they imagined and built these systems spanning not just large areas, but across decades, because they were not built in a single day. So interpreting a map like this that comes from the Adil Shahi time to be able to create an image like this that actually helps us understand the soil, the subsurface geology, the underlying nature of the aquifer and its relation to the upper surfaces helps us create a more balanced, a more sustainable, and definitely a much more resilient system in the long run. So many of the working details, of course, not just response to the technical aspects, but the real social and economic needs of the community that surrounds it. Similar was the case with Rajon Ki Bauli, and this is, I think, my last slide. The orange dot that we see to the bottom is the place where the Bauli exists, which is part of the Mehrauli Archaeological Park. But rather than start from there to look at it as a problem of revival of the Bauli, one actually stepped back quite a bit to understand the larger geographical constraints of the region. Could be the Aravalis to the south, to the Yamuna banks on the north. How does the hydrogeological system of this larger region, starting with Shahjahanabad to the extreme north, to Jahanabad to the extreme south, they have all responded to these geological systems at various points in time across the last 10 centuries. We may feel very good about interpreting this information as something that we invented, but this is inherent knowledge. This is the embedded wisdom that I'm talking about, which is very, very invaluable as we go forward to looking at present day needs of the society.
Right.
On this itself, I will not explain because Annabelle has already done so. Yeah, I will conclude it. Yeah.
It's fascinating, Mohan, because now it's given me a new perspective when I look at historic sites and heritage sites. I'm going to look at the hydrogeological maps, and I don't know whether they exist in every place. I'm going to reach out to you to kind of get access to whatever you have, because this really puts the whole settlement patterns in context. And the question I'm dying to ask is, are urban planners today even looking at these kind of maps to do it? The answer is, troubling, but I will come to
Yes.
that. But let's get Jigna in on this. Jigna, you work in the Khera district in Gujarat, and you're working on the restoration of Vav over there, which again is in an area which is very densely populated. Now that has its own challenges. I'd like you to kind of weigh in on that and tell us what the challenges have been as you worked over there.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Minnie. We are working on Kund Vav. It's a very interesting name. Kund is a different typology and Vav is a different typology, but this particular place is called a Kund Vav in, as I said, Kheda district in kind of north of Gujarat. We are in very initial stages, I think within the first 6 months of the work having started. And we've just kind of initially, we kind of, while we understand the monument, we are scraping the surface of understanding the water system yet, but I'll share what we have done so far. As you can see on the slide, there is also Directorate of Archaeology and Museums here, who are the current custodians of the site. The slide that you see here shows the Kund Vav right in the middle of a kind of a dense historic town. Uh, and on the left is the town and the location of the Kund Vav and the walled, what would have been a walled small town. And on the right is the fabric within which the Kund Vav is situated. There is also another step where another Vav, which is right towards the north. I'll come to that in a little bit. The Kund itself was built in the 12th century by Siddharth Jaising. But the town, we assume that the town, the dense town around it may have come up later. And our initial timeline studies reflect that the Kund possibly had a greater ground around it when it was built. Like we do in the conservation processes, the first step was to understand the significance from the point of view of, we started off with the point of view of an architectural significance and then started studying the water system of it. So this site is quite unique as it represents the example of the architecture associated with conservation and storage of water found across India, something that Mohan just spoke about and Annabelle just spoke about, and is one of the unique examples of water structure that became the kind of a nucleus around which a town grew. Today, it is the only water structure of this scale in the state of Gujarat, which is situated in the center of an old town. Kundwa is the second water structure after Surya Kund Modhera, which is associated with a Toran structure with intricate carvings built to commemorate victory of a Chalukya dynasty. So I think Gujarat has around 11 such structures, and the three quite intricate ones. One is in Vardnagar, second one is in Modhera, and the third one is over here. Kundwa is also one of the few surviving examples of architecture which has integrated the spatial organization and proportioning systems of Mahagurjara tradition with elaborate carvings and ornamentation of that particular style. Kundwa retains its authenticity in material design workmanship, and usage as a water structure, not necessarily in the same way, but it is still a water structure, and I'll get to that in a bit. Our initial studies, you'll see a little map here, which is pointing different water structures in the town. We've just completed the preliminary studies of where all the, what this Kund is part of as a larger system. And we kind of find stepwells, lakes and wells. You can see all of them are not in very great condition, all of them in quite dilapidated condition all around. We have also done basic water testing, and we found that each of these structures have different levels of fecal matters or have low level of oxygens, indicating that they're not getting, the water is not circulating within them, and the underground connections, if they were, and there are our further studies will possibly prove what those connections are either kind of punctured with current sanitation systems or are blocked and creating a certain kind of stagnation in these water systems. We found some archival images And as present, as you must have seen in earlier images, the kund has vegetation on it. These images that were taken in between 1997, the first one is 1977, another one is 1981. They're much cleaner. And at this point, you will see the water surface also much low. Wherever there's water, it's cleaner or particularly empty. It kind of gives an idea that the kund was taken care of. Its water was seeping in summer, just now it's stagnating. Uh, the members of the community in the meetings that we had suggest that up until late 80s, the kund was taken care of by the Nagar Palika. The dates align as the act, along with the act of listing of monuments under Gujarat State Archaeology. The act was enacted in 1965, and various monuments were listed in a couple of decades after that. So one imagines that in that around that decade, the building in 80s, the building, the structure, the site got listed and got cordoned off, and thus kind of limiting the access, public access. And now it is practically a dumping place. Everybody whose house faces the kund throws their waste in it. This has kind of the good and the bad side. We tend to think that if it was open to public, it was necessarily a good thing. But the good thing about Nagarpalika's accessibility was that it made the kund as a part of the public activity and a people's place. The sump below, as I said, of the kund was cleaned regularly. The water circulation was better. But the Nagarpalika, however, started occupying the site, and in this slide, you will see the slabs constructed, the toilets constructed. They started introducing insensitive introductions to cater to public events. So the slab and the toilets were in some of these images, you will see that they were directly rested on the pavilion structures without being careful about what would that do to the existing historic structure as well. So the rationale of protection by the archaeology also came from that some of these open access decisions were creating insensitive additions to the structure itself. But that the protectionism went against the way the water was being treated. So the project here, of course, is conserving the Kunduva as a structure, and that's how it got triggered. That's how it got started. And the Toran, or the drawing over here, as you can see, that represents certain kind of architecture. And we've developed careful means of documenting, recording, dismantling, repairing, reconstructing, and of what is historically significant.
Yeah.
But what is more important to the project is to reintroduce the relationship that people had with water, along with the symbolism of the kund, to establish that relationship as a historic value, as much as the structure having historic value. The challenge is to do that with deep engagement with communities and to introduce bottom-up processes. So this is the first meeting that we had where Annabelle and Madhushe were also present, and we had a fantastic interaction with the members of Nagarpalika and people they invited. But these interactions require us to also understand our processes a little better, a little more deeply, and understand the need of flexibility in our processes. So, for example, our first step as conservation architects is to barricade a site and safeguard it. But in this meeting, and of course, the first action was let's demolish the toilets. But in this meeting, there were reservations around these processes to saying if you do that first, people will think that you're being destructive before you're being, you're adding anything new. So that required us to change a little bit of our processes and understand or redesign them in a way that would be more acceptable by everybody and bring everybody on board. As a part of our process, what we will also be doing is, and these are images from our other sites, but what we will be doing when the summer goes, because summer in Gujarat is going to be terrible, is to we will be conducting open houses, public discussions on not just the structure but historic water systems. We'll be engaging local school children in the matters of understanding relationships of historic structure, water systems, and life. While we already have established a very good relationship with the Nagarpalika, we are currently in the process of collaborating with the Kappadwanj Kedavani Mandal, who run the schools and colleges of the region, and we feel that that collaboration is going to be quite important. We also believe that it is important to leave the community with capacities, not just to understand the historic meaning of the places, in this case also the water systems, they must be empowered to act towards caring for them. We will be also running a series of capacity building programs that will address that.
Very quickly, let's go to Anu now. You're working in Rajasthan, in Jodhpur. Anu, give us a sense of the kind of work you're doing, the challenges that you're facing, and the interaction with the community over there.
So, I mean, most of the things that are issues concerning restoration of these water bodies have been touched upon. So I'm not going to go into this. I'll quickly give an overview of the place I'm talking about, Jodhpur, because we're going to focus on Jodhpur, although we are doing work almost in the entire Marwar region and also some in Jaipur with WMF. So Jodhpur falls in the rain shadow area of the Aravalli range, and it is on one of the outcrops of Aravalli. So there's a small hillock over there on which Jodhpur was established. Here the temperatures run very high, almost about 50 degrees, at times even over that. The rainfall in Jodhpur is 300 and sometimes a little less. And as you go more towards west, I'll just share this thing. Yeah, more towards west, it reduces to even 100. So this entire desert region was dependent only on rain, and the population of desert is as equal to the as much as the population of Australia, and yet it has been thriving for centuries now, and only because of these local water bodies, the indigenous water bodies. There are no perennial rivers over here. I'll quickly come to Jodhpur now. So Jodhpur was established in the year 1459 on a ridge of a hillock called Aravalli Range. So it was very clearly divided that on the northwest side were the craggy hills where they collected water, and on the southeast side were the plains where the city came up. So this is how the city plan finally emerged. So you can see the larger lakes on the hillock sides, and it was all distributed in the plains over here. These blue dots that you see are all the water bodies. I'm told that there are about 400 water bodies in Jodhpur. This whole thing was spread in almost about 7 kilometers of area. And within that, in 500 years or 400 years, they developed so many water bodies. As the population and the extent of the city increased, expanded, so did the water bodies. And there are a variety of water bodies. I will quickly talk about the portfolio. There are principally 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 water bodies. This is a natural lake. This is a kund or a tank, which we can, from natural lake, the water is transported into these tanks in the city. And then, of course, there are subsurface water bodies. Like these are variants of wells. So this is a simple well. This is what we call Bawli over here, what is called Vav in Gujarat, Bawli in Delhi and those places. And this is a more open kind of an area which is called a Jhalara, which a picture of it, which you can see at the bottom. And this is how it was distributed. If you see in the dense settlement, these are the tanks that we had over there. And around these tanks, because they had impermeable bases, so around these tanks, they were all the wells. And there were numerous wells. If you go on a street, there'll be wells in, say, tens, and sometimes it goes up to almost 50. So within walking distance, you would find wells and you can go and fetch water. So while these were for collection, wells were for access. And that is how decentralization happened, that these lakes, natural lakes, and the tanks were under state control. But as they became, as these water bodies, they would, to make them accessible, you would have only the wells. Public could not go to these places. They could go around this, but they were under state control. But they cannot access water from there. The case study that we are taking, I'll zoom in on one of the boundaries that we have just restored about almost a couple of years back. We started the effort. In fact, we started even before pandemic. We had to stop for 2 years and we started again. So this is one of the largest tanks in a built tank, man-made tank, where water from the natural lakes is brought. Around this, this is one of the water bodies. There's another one over here, Tuji Ka Jhalra, which is another very famous one. And there are numerous tanks all around it. So you see, this is the large tank, and over here, Mailabag Jhalra, where we have written this. Let me get these. Yeah. So this is the Jhalra that we have over here, which we restored. This was built in 1776, if I'm not mistaken. This is how the lay of the place is. This is the Gulab Sagar, which is a large tank. And this is Mailabag Jhalra. There's a temple and there's a chowk. Now, these are the 4 important components. And then, of course, these are houses. Some were built later and some were there centuries ago. This is one of the archival picture which we got from one of the books. It is very different today. But that time they had these parapets which have now been changed because government worked on it. ADB worked on it for some time. When we adopted it, this was a state. That time the parapets had already been changed. Some electrical, some light poles had been installed over there, but it was in a terrible state and it was full of garbage. But once we started work on it, we had to stop it because of pandemic. And for 2 years we did nothing. And this was the state it finally landed in. Then we adopted it again through an NGO and we started working on it. We first started dewatering it, started removing all the sludge, started repairing all the steps. And there was a lot of damage over there, which we started doing. Then this was rat infested area. So there were deep holes that they had into the body of the main building they have on this end, this one. So this had to be repaired. We had to find some matching stones. We did not do too much intervention. We used lime mortar. We used only natural material, but we repaired these things. We started cleaning after dewatering, removed a lot of sludge and a lot of garbage, tons and tons of it. It took us almost about a month to completely remove the sludge from it. Then we started, while we dewatered, we started making drawings in 3Ds. We measured it inch by inch. And the reason why we made 3Ds is because at a future date, when it gets filled up and we want to access something or we want to know how it is going to be inside, even if we have to install new infrastructure. So we thought we must have a complete document of this. This is how we started doing. This is the plan and section of it. It's spread in almost about 100 feet by 100 feet. This is where they would have the Persian wheel. And steps on 3 sides. So this is called a jhalra. Jhalra because the steps are in the shape of a jhalra, a frill. It is unlike the linear unidirectional vav or bawdis you have. And these are not very many in Jodhpur. These are only about 5 or 6 as against the vavs which may be almost in 60 or 70 in number. And this is the 3D that we finally, the complete system, Mailabag Jhalra. It's called Mailabag Jhalra. People mistake it for Mahila. Mahila is because it was Mahila in the local dialect means inside. So it was part of a large garden which is called Bagh over here. So Mailabag, the inside the Bagh. So I'll quickly come to how we are developing it now. So this is the old plan. I'm just revisiting that slide. So this is where you have Mailabag, this is the temple, and this is the Gulab Sagar. So we are addressing the entire area, including this shop. We are reviving this whole thing into a cultural hub. The problem is that, now you don't have to go and fetch water. So your direct connection with water has snapped completely. So the question is, how do you engage with the community? How do you make sure that the community takes care of it? And that's how we have introduced some programs, because we failed in some of the earlier ones that we did. We conserved those, we cleaned those things. But once we had done that, because these are all state properties, once we had done that, these reverted back to the state, but there was nobody to take care of it. So while structural conservation was done, cleanliness again became an issue. So in this case, what we did, we brought in an NGO who was interested, that NGO was interested in they had their interest in, conserving water structures and all. So after conservation, we handed it over to them. We have drawn an MOU with the municipality, with the NGO, and with our own organization about the upkeep and all. And so we have adopted it for 2 years. What we are trying to do is, even when we started conserving, we started engaging with the community around, the neighborhood around, so much so that people who were throwing garbage over here, they started sharing their electricity so that, we could do the initial work over here, draw out water and all those things. And now what we have done is we are developing it and other such conserved water bodies into cultural hubs, where we are having programs, we are involving the neighborhood, because you see, even after centuries of having built, I mean, normally when you see at other ancient structures, for instance, if you look at fort, it has to be repurposed. Now, here are water structures, ancient water structures, they don't have to be repurposed. So they are serving the original purpose of supplying water. So what we are trying to do is that water is now being drawn, but it's supplied somewhere else. We are trying to impress upon the government that they start supplying water, if it is possible, to the neighborhood. The moment it starts going into the houses of the neighbors, they will start valuing water, and they'll make sure that this water is not, further messed up with. So they'll start taking care of this water. This is what we are aiming at. But in the meantime, what we are doing is, like this one, we are developing all the other boundaries that we are doing into socio-cultural hubs. So we've started doing programs. Now, we are also doing some, for instance, concerts, but we are involving the neighborhood around it, which is, and our focus is certainly not the tourists. Tourists will come and go. It's a community and it's the citizens of Jodhpur that we are reviving these for. And this Mailabag is a case study I'm showing because it is, compared to others, it has really worked out to be a very successful project for us. Another thing that has happened is, this is not Mailabag, this is another Jhalra. So when this is developed, what has happened is, and it is being taken care of, this entire street you see over here, it has developed into a very lovely, I would say completely commercial area, but a cultural area. There are a lot of museums happening over there. There are a lot of restaurants that are taking place. There are permanent and temporary museums also over there. And there are hotels. It's a very, very famous hotel which has come about over there. Now with these things, for a structure which is almost 3 centuries old, to be able to become an economic engine for the neighborhood tells you about the sustainability quotient of these water bodies. And so they are not only being revived as socio-cultural spaces, which originally they were, but they are also providing employment to people around there. They've become economic generators. So I'll quickly go back to the Mailabag Jhalra. This is one of the pictures, and this is the chalk that we're talking of. We've just made a scheme of how we're going to do it, that they're creating some ghats in front of this Gulab Sagar. This is called the tank. And on the opposite side is this Jhalra. But all these chalks, which were traditionally also used for festivities and dances and folk dances and celebrations of various festivals, we're going to develop these into that again. And this Jhalra we're using for lectures, we're using for school children who come and spend time over there. Paintings happen there. Tourists also walk in and they just spend time over there because it's a shaded area, a cool area compared to the other places in the city. But most importantly, we make sure that school children come here on a regular basis. They spend time not only just to see, but we are also promoting that they come and have their outdoor classes happening over here. And this is the kind of things that we are doing over there. There's a concert that we did over there, which is very successful. And this is what we are planning. We are joining hands with the government. The government is now allowing us to do that because they've seen the success of how these are being turned around. And because this is happening, the community has started taking care of it. The neighborhood started taking care of it. And we are making sure that they partner with it. And for us, as far as Mailabag Jhalra is concerned, this has become exemplary, and this has become a model how to develop the other ones in Jodhpur. So if you look at the Jodhpur map and you see how these have been inserted into the fabric of the city. So if we convert these into socio-cultural hubs, you'll see the entire city. So almost every neighborhood is going to have something of this kind for community celebration, because even today, people who are living in the walled city area, they do not have formal drawing rooms. So they spend most of the time outside of their houses. Thank you.
Great, that's wonderful. It's not only the restoration, but also the rejuvenation of the space and an interaction with the community that is very, very critical. I think we have overshot on time, so I'm going to quickly run through a bunch of questions based on the presentations and also take 2-3 questions that our audience members have asked. Mohan, I'm going to start with you. You spoke about how the heritage water bodies were not independent, but rather interdependent. Now, what we know, and I've done some work on the Delhi Baulis, is that when the British came, they didn't understand this concept of traditional water systems, and many of them were just left to rot, quite literally. They became sewage channels. They were not integrated into the larger infrastructure around water for settlements. And over a period of time, they have either been isolated or they have been corrupted with the drainage water. Now, this is a serious challenge. And, also I must add that many baulis and water bodies have been destroyed over a period of time. So when we're talking about these handful of cases where restoration work is being done, we need to highlight that we've lost so much. We really need to take care of these. So Mohan, very quickly, how can you tackle this? And this is being done retrospectively because a lot of the damage is done. So what are the challenges therein?
Yes, this is a very critical issue, not just for the heritage water bodies, even domestic wells across our cities continue to get highly contaminated because of this issue. One is to recognize that this is not merely engineered water infrastructure, unlike a bore well, which you dig a pipe 1,000 meters down and you draw out water. Open wells, bawdis, pushkarnis, whatever name they go by, are deeply interlinked to the subsurface geology and to the larger topography. So it is very responsive to not only the rainfall and precipitation that happens from above, but also the soil and geological conditions that happen from below. So one big change that has happened in all our cities, of course, is the introduction of piped sewage. And that has really changed the nature of the game, not only from the water regime perspective, but from multiple other perspectives. And while you rightly said that all the solutions need to be worked in retrospectively, it is still not an impossible situation as long as we recognize that these are not independent standalone tubes or silos that are sitting in the ground, but are actually part of a larger organic system that is connected both above and below.
Interesting. Annabelle, I'm going to ask one of the questions that Poonam Mascarenhas from York has asked. How does landscape approach contrast with a monument-centric approach in education and practice? I'm going to, ask this question in the context of the work that we've been discussing in this forum. So in that context, how do you look at the WAV itself as opposed to the entire ecosystem around it?
So in all the projects that WMF has taken up, the approach has been to look at what the site needs and not treat it as a monument. So whether it is the landscape of Rajaon Ki Baudi, the original plan that we had was to get dispersion trenches, detention ponds, which would aid in filtering the water before it moves into the Baudi. So there is surface water that drains and then moves into the tank, comes in through the walls of the tank, etc. So in order to treat that water or filter that water, the landscape around would have been treated with these features. Okay, so it's not being treated as a monument and given a setting as, either an ornamental landscape or something, but very a functional approach to the landscape. The same is the case with Taj Baudi, where we are looking at putting in a feature where Ganesh Visarjan can happen as it has been happening. So that would be a feature in the landscape around. So it's both functional as well as what the site needs in terms of the water feature itself.
Right. There's another question from Poonam.
Maybe if I can just add to what Annabelle said, because I think when Poonam said it is the landscape approach, I think she also means it from a systemic perspective where you're looking at the larger ecosystem morphology as an organic element and not just as a static element. So, and I think in all the cases that we're talking about, that approach is paramount in understanding the effectiveness of the revival systems that one is deploying.
Jigna, I'm going to talk to you. You did share how you spoke to the various stakeholders within the community. At what stage do you need to rope them in? Of course, there's a preliminary stage before you start work. But the biggest challenge with restoration is the fact that what happens after you finish and leave? How do you sensitize them or make it an inimical part of their life? Reintroduce their own vow to them, to cut it short. Jigna, what is the approach that you're going to be taking?
So I think for every site, this approach kind of changes depending upon what is the nature of the existing relationship. So in case of Kapadvanj, it's quite interesting that the memory of the relationship that people had with the vow and the kund is still there. It's not gone off from their mind, because till 80s there were relationships, in the sense that there would be, during the time of festivities, they would light up the kund. There is a little temple there where they would go and pray. There would be certain kind of some of the public activities that would happen there, because of which they created this slab. So that memory is still there. So for that reintroduction is not going to be a kind of revival of or kind of introduction of a new memory or new activity or creating new memories. It's almost tapping into what existed, but with the new sensitivity of what activities that we do, what does it do to the water system, what does it do to the historic structure. So I think it's in a way, yes, revival of what is already there in the in their memory. And I think the conversations earlier they start, the better, because many a times there is already 10 or 20 years ago there was this imagination that uh, conservation was not understood by the communities. Unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, I don't know, the people now understand conservation processes, but they do not necessarily have positive connotations to it. They see conservation processes as experts coming and doing their own thing and going away. And I think it is that the first few meetings that we've had is just breaking that myth, saying that no, we are here to, you're the custodians, we're the catalysts, and
Sure.
kind of creating
Yeah.
that relationship is important.
Right.
Yeah.
And you actually touched upon a very important point, which is really the economic rejuvenation of a space after an intervention like this. And I think that's really the key for heritage conservation, where people see the difference. But very often when you're working with communities, it's always nice to look back on the rearview mirror and look at the positive or the happy, collaborations. But they're often difficult conversations as well that needs to be had with people-led projects, because this is a community that you are intervening in, with their interaction with their own space. So how do you approach it, and any lesson from there very quickly that others can take?
See, well, I would look at it differently, because in Jodhpur, a place like Jodhpur, what happens is that from the time that these water bodies were used till now, from when they were abandoned, almost 2 generations have passed. And people had stopped looking at these altogether, because water was being tapped to home and you did not have to go and fetch water. Your relationship with water had snapped. So if you look at the new generation, it is not even in their memory what it used to be. And in fact, these had become garbage areas, so they never really looked with reverence at these things. So even today, it is very difficult until and unless we start introducing programs where they are directly impacted by these water bodies. And that's the reason, 3 things that I spoke about is you start supplying water to them, to the neighborhood. They start valuing water. They know that this is a water which comes to them, so they don't mess with it, and they don't throw garbage in it. Number one. Number two, we are also organizing programs where we are engaging with the immediate neighborhood. For instance, we are doing some, plays over there, and we make sure that, the programs are such that the people around get involved in it. So that kind of an attachment we have to rebuild with them, because now they are not going to fetch water there. So they're not actually going to this water body. So those are the kind of programs. And of course, it becomes an economic generator. People around, they start converting some part of their houses into something which is going to generate. They have a restaurant which looks over it. So it's like a, this view kind of a thing that they get. So many things put together. We have been observing and we're trying to bring everything into each of the water body that we are doing.
It has to be an integrated approach. It cannot be an isolated
Yeah.
approach, just restoring a particular,
Principal purpose of supplying water is being served.
Yeah, sure. Mali, last question to you. We are exceeding our time limit, but it's a very important question because it's great to do this kind of work with experts like we have on our panel. But what happens after? Maintenance becomes a big issue. How do you rejuvenate and continue the dialogue with the community and continue to make it a very relevant part of the community? Also, at an organizational level, there are multiple stakeholders that you are interacting with when you are going out and picking up a project and looking at it in a holistic way. So what are the challenges that you face? What are the lessons over there? Very quickly. I know it's very difficult to such a big question in an answer, but I'd like to hear from you.
Thanks for asking I think the most difficult question to answer, and certainly for the panel, we've all alluded to that. So, so very theoretically, one would say that, and that's the the effort and the endeavor that we try to to operate within, is first of all talk to the stakeholders to understand what it is that they understand of this space, this monument, so that is within their community. And those stakeholders could be the community that lives around it. It could be the government. It could be the body that manages that space. And what do they see as an end use for this restored monument? Because, we're going in there to restore it. We're going in there to conserve the monument. But then the first question to ask is, what does the stakeholder see at the end of our exercise? Because, our job will be to help them restore the place, help them to rejuvenate it and bring it back to life. But what is the life that they envisage for it, for themselves? Now, it could either be something that the community wants for itself or something that is suggested to them. And in, so both cases, there has to be a clear vision. And then after that, the intent also has to be there. And that intent has to be, how am I going to manage this space? What are the resources that I will need to manage this space? And so I'll take the example of, say, an authority that is managing a space. So, and, so we talk about the different stakeholders one by one. So if I was to go into a community and to an authority and say, okay, here is something that you are custodian of, and what do you intend to do with this space? So they will have to then, explain to me, or, so we gather an understanding, a common understanding of how they're going to actually actively manage the space. And that should be a commitment that they also have to make, that this is how I will maintain the space, this is how I will manage the space. They may need assistance, they may need help, advice, inputs, and support to, start working towards management. And there are bodies that are now coming into existence to help authorities manage spaces after they have been restored and conserved. Of course, the ideal situation is if the building, the monument, the structure is actively used for some purpose which has clearly been defined. So, for example, if you're going to use the place as a school, if you're going to use it as a library or as an institution for public, activities, a hotel, so whatever it is that you want to look at for public good, then, then it's easy that it will be maintained properly. But if it is going to be used as, say, a tourist, a visitor, a place for visitors to come in, then whichever authority it is, whether it is a local authority, a central government authority that manages, must have a very clear understanding of their responsibilities too. And then comes in the engagement with the community at hand, and the benefits to the community are also visible quite often, as Anu alluded to, as Jigna alluded to as well, that the community sees the benefits coming to them if they maintain a place in a fashion that is pristine, in a fashion that is attractive to bring in visitors, and then they can generate commercial activities around this space that will help them sustain the space. So, maybe a water body is something that will not be used in the way in which it was, sort of 200 years ago. But certainly in the fashion in which it is being used today, there must be pride, there must be ownership, there must be responsibility and accountability from whichever stakeholder it is that is responsible for that place after its restoration is done. And I know that's a convoluted answer which says nothing at all, but
No, Malini, it is an important, no, I think it says a lot, because I think it is important to start the process with that understanding,
yes,
and I think Annabelle's promise of potable water from these restored valves is quite fascinating, because I mean, that is a full circle, right? I mean, the fact that you have the ability or the possibility or the probability of having potable water after restoring these valves and cleaning them up, I think is also a very interesting point. That brings us to the end of this conversation, but an end of this panel discussion, but not the end of the conversation, I'm afraid, because I think this is something that needs a lot of delving into, lots of learnings from the presentations today. And my one suggestion, Malini, is that we must have a nice archive of a lot of these beautiful maps, beautiful plans, and game plans, I would add, for restoration, because it'll be such a nice way for students to learn, such a nice
yes,
way for even our urban planners to look at water and the way we have conserved water, managed water in the past. So I think that would be why my one suggestion, that we
yes,
create an archive also from international learnings, because
correct.
Monument Fund has access to so much, right?
Correct. Yes. And may I end with a big thank you to everyone and many to you for having put this panel, sort of together, and to have, so brought out, so relevant questions and this really interesting and important discussion amongst us all. And absolutely right, we must continue this engagement.
Thank you so much.